So then we are back with more understanding from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yershiyahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yershiyahu the prophet, we find then the layer of chapter 1:8 explaining then the returning of the holy cities laid waste from many centuries. Then we link up with Daniel the 11th chapter, where the main bulk of the understanding of tabernacling is with Africa. Let's then understand precisely where it's at. Firstly then, reading from the Israelic lineage, you find then the chapter 1:8, and woe to the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, and then explains afterwards and the existing place of the land of Cush. Have to be very cautious what translation you read, because the Hebrew words are very specific, and then as we read these we understand on the land of Cush it is then the first tabernacling of the restoration period. Where it's located at? In Sudan. That's where it's at. And then until we have these tabernacling then set up, we find then a gap of time. So let's understand where it's at. When we read, for instance, the returning of the Soviet Union, and as we can read from the newspapers, we find then it is true. In reading from the Holy Instructions, then when we read regarding then the Kingdom of the North, then there is a jump, for instance, and then in the later times the Kingdom of the North shall come with a great army and much equipment. This explaining of the armies of the end. It's much later. But then, because explains the layer related with the Soviet Union later at the end of times and the very end, explaining of times of the autumn feast, quite a few years ahead yet. Then we have to link then the understanding of the Soviet Union and the sons of Ishmael, and then directly with the vision of tabernacling. So then, when we reach this section, there are many layers, and we must understand each of them, so then we can flow with these events taking place at the same time. Have you ever heard of a machine with many rounds of situations in Ezekiel, the first chapter? It's a machine of simultaneously events taking place at the same time. This is what the machine is. As we read each of these layers and we understand they are in motion, then we understand how those layers work. There is then a mixture of establishing the vision. There is the layer regarding the holy city being fortified, and then because of these we find then prosperity on the land linked with tabernacling. The Creator, He knows how to do the work. He didn't separate those situations, because if He would have, what would have taken place? People would get stuck in prosperity only. So He made in such a way where then you have to have the proper people of establishing these understandings. He has to have His people precisely at the precise moment to set up tabernacling, and you have a certain amount of prosperity taking place, so then these layers they work together to make sure then His plans then takes place. Has to have absolutely no doubt it regarding then the divine synchronisms of these events, because there are many of them. We can't either get stuck with tabernacling, neither we can get stuck with the fortified city, neither we can get stuck with armies, but we have to have a very precise understanding of these layers. That's why we have Ezekiel the first chapter, because we have to understand those layers. Each of them then are events taking place at the same time. What we know for sure is there is then beyond the rivers of Ethiopia And this place is precisely then the region of Congo, because there is a link with the Congo and the European Union. From then on, there is a link with the new system from China. From then on, there is a link with the Soviet Union. And there is a link also with computers, a link with prosperity. So this land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia precisely is then the region of Congo. Then we understand what takes place there, because then we have to read then the 7th verse regarding then the Gentile Netzer and the system thereof. Then we understand this portion, then we understand also the land of Cush. That's where tabernacling is at. So in what events these are taking place here? These are in the hand of God. Precisely because from these events and understanding the Ezekiel's machine with many layers being movement at the same time, and then there was a circle that goes around the other circle, and then the other circle, and then for those people who read only Ezekiel the 1st chapter, they wouldn't understand ever. But then we understand what those mean. Those are layers, each of them taking place at the same time, but takes place a bit, for instance, of tabernacle. Then there is another round situation that goes around because of the prosperity of the land. Then there is another because of the northern kingdom, and there is another then because of tabernacling. So then there is, you understand Ezekiel the 1st chapter. And as we understand these factors, a situation is sure. Because of the new system of China, then infrastructuring is very important. However, it does not mean the infrastructure comes first, then tabernacling, because the Creator is obviously orchestrating this entire situation in His own authority. But what we know for sure, beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, there is a place, and the place is Congo, because it's riches and minerals, because of the age of electronics and technology. And then we understand tabernacling on the land of Cush. How the Creator is going to work these situations, we must understand a factor. We must read and understand the Torah. That's our first understanding. From then on, then we reach the prophets. The first prophet we should be concerned with is Yershiyahu, because Yershiyahu has the entire understanding of the time of the restoration period, and also tabernacling. And then Ezekiel, and then Daniel. As Yershiyahu has mentioned many times, we should renew our mind with the holy instruction, so then we can understand these layers. We know there are events taking place. Let's verify. Until the 8th chapter, it is somewhat linear. From then on, when mixes then the sons of Ishmael and then the southern portion, because sections of the holy instructions as you read is not the southern kingdom, is bound southbound. So you have to understand how this works, and when it does, then you find this big huge machine taking place at the same time. Those are in the hands of the Creator. He knows what He does. But then our portion is understanding the instructions and then verifying each of these layers, and then we should be very concerned with the works of Ruach HaKodesh, because He works very precisely then from afar, and then we can understand even further these, because there is also a link with gelah or revelation. So then you can understand many of these situations taking place at the same time, simultaneously. And then we understand the big machine of Ezekiel. Those are events taking place. Later on, then I'm going to study then the covenant. Because as you can understand, the covenant is directly linked with establishing the vision, and directly related with the fortified city. But until you find the establishment of the vision and the fortified city, there is a gap of time where we must understand then the covenant, because later on there is then a false covenant. on behalf of prosperity that's going to be infiltrated in the midst of the system. So we are aware of there is a problem going on in a place where we are reading from a document of the past pointing to the future. So then, we should have our minds then set up with the situation and then study even further, because Yershiyahu has mentioned those who are from the Gentile world should understand obviously the Torah and then the prophets. And Yershiyahu has said and desire mostly prophecy, because then we understand the Torah further. The more prophecies we understand of these end of times, the more we must read the Torah. So then later on I'm going to evaluate more of this situation, because then takes place, unfortunately, wars. It's where it takes place. There are many conflicts during this time, and then because of these, then we should have a space for tabernacling. And then we understand the African continent is absolutely the very center of this entire understanding. And then later on, obviously, the world are being linked up with China, but while it's being linked up, then Africa must have its own share in the entire prophecy related with Daniel. Because not only in Daniel, there is also in Yershiyahu. Not only Yershiyahu, but there is also in Gelah. So then, later going to study more of this. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.